A lot of times on the internet, we like to complain about what makes someone a bad D&D player. But what are the qualities of a good D&D player? Keep in mind that you can be a good D&D player, but not fit into all of these categories. In fact, most people are going to struggle at one of these things. So knowledge is the most basic way to show improvement in the game. When you start off at your first session 0, you're going to have 0 knowledge. But the more you play, the more you get comfortable with the game, the more knowledge you accrue and the more obvious it is that you're good at the game. There's a good chance that you've probably seen that actually clip of Matt Mercer having to figure out what all of the problems are in the comic panels in the D&D thing. And not only does he get all of them right, but he notices problems that the people who made the question weren't even checking for. That is about as good as anyone is going to get when it comes to knowledge about D&D. It's actually somewhat easy to get to the point in the game where you're playing at a similar level to a much more experienced player. That's because once you know how initiative works and skills and saving throws, the only other things that you need to remember are the things that apply to your specific character. And once you know those things, unless you're trying to perfectly optimize your game, there really isn't much benefit to becoming more knowledgeable. And even a more knowledgeable player might say, hey, it's more fun for me to play a non-optimized character, and therefore their extra knowledge that they have really doesn't matter. But what if you're not at that point yet? Maybe learning the rules is still hard for you, either because you're new to the game, or maybe you're playing a brand new class that interacts with the game differently. The question we want to ask ourselves then is, how do we play the game like we know it if we don't? What I've found, if I'm playing a new class or subclass that I'm not fully comfortable with all its new abilities, I create a little cheat sheet for myself. What the optimal things to do on a given turn are, what I should do if I want to do a lot of damage at once, or what I should do if I want to save resources. A brand new player might need a lot more of this that apply to a lot more general rules of the game. For someone like me, this is all I need. However, you just need to make what works best for you. So when I'm on Discord calls, it looks like I know the class I'm playing really well, when it's probably my first time. Now to me, I feel like this next one is the most easily forgotten skill by some people, but I really think it's the most crucial. Attentiveness. There can be a player at my table who has tons of issues. However, if they're remaining attentive, they're probably going to be my favorite player. Being attentive can mean something like taking good notes. I mean, for me, I am absolutely terrible at taking notes at all. I put down a pen and paper to try to remember doing it, and then I just end up getting engrossed in playing the game, and I look down and I realize I forgot to write down half the things that we were talking about. Even as a DM, I'm often forgetting to write down the things that we're mentioning. And when I go to prep the next session, I have to go back into my memory to figure out what happened in the previous one. But when I have that player who manages to take good notes, who during the recap can remind me that I've introduced a character I thought I hadn't introduced yet, that saves me a ton of headache and really puts that person into my good graces. But if you're like me and absolutely cannot take good notes, but still want to be attentive, well, there is a second part to being attentive, which is being timely. Something I am really good at is knowing how long it takes me to get somewhere, and then giving myself a couple extra minutes of wiggle room to make sure that I won't be late. But this doesn't just apply to in-person games. If I'm playing on a Discord call, I'll usually join it 5 minutes beforehand so I can say hello to everyone as they join. If I'm the dungeon master of the game, I usually join 15 minutes early in case someone has an issue they can hop on and we can talk about it before the game starts. Being an on-time player is probably one of the easiest things that you can do, and it really makes everyone else appreciate you because they know they can trust you and rely on you to show up when you say you're gonna show up. Something I think is really rarely talked about is a player's ability to keep a good pace. It's one of the most glaring issues I see in some people, and it is something that's really hard to talk about because it's hard to find the right way or the nice way to tell another player to get on with it.
Yes, get on with it!
When I say pacing, I mean knowing when you've talked to an NPC for long enough and knowing that it's time to move on to the next scene. It's turning to your DM and asking, hey, I just want to buy some extra adventuring gear. Instead of making a whole shopping trip, can I just tell you what I'm buying? I'm going to go off of the prices in the player's handbook and seeing if they say yes. It means, and this is the most important one, when it gets to your turn in combat, you immediately know what you're going to do, and you do it. A lot of this can tend to be faulted on the DM, as for me, I take pacing very seriously in my games, and I'm always working with the players to help them push the story forward in a quick enough pace, because RPGs are already slow enough as it is. We don't need to be bogging down the game with things that aren't necessary. I have a rule in my games where if it gets to your turn in combat and it's clear you're struggling to make a decision, I'll suggest the decision for you. And if it keeps going and you still won't make a choice even with my suggestion, then we'll say, oh, we're gonna move on to the next person because your character has frozen up due to their lack of ability to make a decision. Now, the thing is because I make that suggestion, I don't even think my players remember that that's a rule because I've never had to apply it, thankfully. So what if you have a pacing problem? Maybe this is a behavior you've noticed, but you can't really control when you're in the moment of the game. How do you get past this issue and help the games move forward quickly and smoothly? Well, I'll just say this usually isn't a problem of experience. It's usually a problem of lack of confidence or anxiety. Most of the time when someone's slowing the game down to a halt, it's because they're worried they're either going to miss out on something that's important that could affect the choices they're able to make in the future, are able to affect their ability to make the right decision. It's able to affect their ability to survive the next encounter. Slowing the game down to figure out what the right choices to make is about the closest as a player can get to real-life save scumming. So a good idea to help this is to try to get more comfortable with risk. A good place to start is making characters who themselves are comfortable with risk or are very brash, act first, think later. My first character was a barbarian who always ran into battle head first without question. There were multiple times where the other players were very aware we were walking into a trap, but I just went straight into it because my character heard a girl screaming for help, and I knew that he wouldn't think twice about running into a random tunnel to help a girl and wouldn't think about whether or not there were traps or not. I know that my character would run out into a battle totally naked because he just didn't have his clothes on and he heard people who needed help, so he went to go save them. Most of my favorite D&D stories are someone first going, alright, this is going to be stupid, but... and then us following through with whatever crazy action they have to unfold. And the last thing I want to talk about that I think makes a good D&D player is their skills at improvisation. Dungeons & Dragons is, at the end of the day, an improv game, but instead of sourcing unpredictability from the audience, you're sourcing unpredictability from the dice. So when playing D&D, following the rules of improv often make your games more fun and make you a better player. So if you want to get better at Dungeons & Dragons, and I guess improv, here are some of the basic rules of improv that you should be applying to D&D. Now, just as a note, I am changing these up slightly from how they're usually phrased in improv, because the rules of improv are different than the rules of D&D. In improv, everyone is sharing a collective responsibility in adding to the world, whereas in D&D, you have one person who holds the sole responsibility of creating everything in the world, so that changes the dynamic of how you can apply these rules. The first one, which is the one you're most likely to know, is to yes and. So when you're given a piece of information, you accept it and you add on to it. For example, if your DM says you're all sitting in a tavern, you don't want to say, oh, well, actually, I think my character would be waiting outside with the horses. You know the DM has set you in this tavern, so something interesting can happen here, so you might want to say instead, if you want to follow through with that same logic, yes, I'm sitting in the tavern, but I'm sitting at our table, very sad, looking out to where the horses are, wishing I could be there instead. You see, that first one pulled you out of the scene because of what your character would do. The second one added to the scene because of something your character would do. The second one I want to talk about is committing, and committing to the absolute highest degree that you can. The best D&D stories often have the players coming up with some crazy idea and fully committing to try to make it work. In one of my earliest D&D games, our entire party got thrown into jail. While we were waiting in jail, we were talking to the guard that was waiting outside. It turned out that guard was a pretty lonely guy. He still lived with his mom, had never had a girlfriend, and didn't really have any friends within or outside of work. It also turned out that his birthday was only 1 week away, and no one had invited him to any birthday party event, and he didn't invite anyone because he had no one to invite. So what we did is we spent the next in-game week, when we got out of jail later that same in-game day, and spent a whole bunch of time. I think we spent the entirety of that in-game week preparing for this guy's birthday party. We got a cake, we got things I can't talk about, we got people I can't talk about, we got all these different things. We spent a ton of gold making the best birthday party plan we could, and then we spent half of a real life session playing out this guy's birthday party. And I know that sounds silly and a waste of time, but in that moment, it was what all of us wanted to commit to, and we fully committed to it, and it ended up being one of the funniest bits, that this loser of a town guard got the coolest birthday party ever. And not only that, he got it from people who he knew escaped jail. However, because the birthday party was just so great, we were able to get away with it. This didn't happen because the DM planned for it. This happened because us as players saw a funny bit and then committed to it to the ultimate degree. And there you go. Those are just some of the few qualities that make a really good D&D player. If you like this video and you want to see more like it, click that subscribe button to stay updated on future releases. Thank you again, and this is the end of the video.